Good morning, scholars, and welcome to our lecture on how to write a methodology chapter in your research proposal. Basically, this is one of the critical chapters that you need to pay extra attention to because research methodology at proposal level is quite the most substantive, the most required. So you need to pay extra attention so that we come to a common understanding and also to activate your ability to read more and eventually develop your research methodology. So as we go around in this um, lecture, we would be expecting that when we are done with the content, you should be able to define some concepts that are associated with methodology. You must be able to develop your chapter on methodology. And after that, we do the peer reviewing. That's basically what we're going to do. What are some of the requirements as we'll be looking at this lecture? You need to have your internet bundles because you may need to do some personal research based on the discussion. And the databases are there. I will send you the links so that you expand the content of what we are going to discuss in this lecture. So a research methodology is actually a science that precisely shows how investigation of a particular identified research problem is going to be investigated. And you would want to learn that there are diverse methods and tools out there. Some are somehow concrete universal across different disciplines, whereas some are area specific. You'll find that, for example, if it's a clinicians, medical doctors, environmentalists, educationists, they have certain specific methodologies that are only unique to them. So you would want to investigate further and find out what are other methods that people are using elsewhere. But here what we are going to talk about, these are generic components of research methodology. Yes. So this component is very important and you need to pay extra attention, and it is comprehended as one of the most important aspects even after you've done your research. Yeah, so it is a way in which researchers systematically and systemically describe, explain, and justify why they are going to use certain methodological decisions to address a particular problem. Systematically, in the sense that you will need to follow a certain logical sequence as you present this. Systemically, you have to connect dots together. So in methodology, we can say everything is related to everything else. So your methodology is actually being developed based on the gaps that you identified in your literature review, which also informed the way you prepared the problem statement. So it's very important that you understand these aspects very thoroughly so that you know how to connect, how do objectives of your study connect with the way you're going to structure your methodology. And always remember that methodology chapters explain the science behind your study, whether qualitative or quantitative or mixed methodology approach. And from the onset, be reminded that the most common methodological approach, especially if you're doing geography education, you need to know that we focus so much on the qualitative dimension or mixed method. Usually, the quantitative is not really very much pronounced when it comes to geography education, because quantitative aspects leave certain limitations that do not allow you as a researcher to go very deep, and it may actually limit you. So it's either qualitative or mixed methodology that is going to help you. So what are the common components? What are the most common components of a research methodology chapter? So basically, there are many components, and we'll be going one by one in their respective order. How do they cascade? So the first is actually the philosophical orientation of your work. Now, when we talk about philosophy, should not be something that actually must straighten you, because philosophy is a very simple concept. It is made up of two words that are originally Greek: philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom. So the question is, which wisdom would you want to inform your research and research methodological decisions? So within these, you will find different approaches and techniques that are used that I'm going to share with you very soon. Now, my interest is not to start philosophically explaining these things, but to show you how do you apply philosophy when you are doing your research methodology. So the first thing is define the meaning of the philosophical framework that you have adopted. We have philosophical frameworks such as critical realism, post-structuralism, interpretivism, hermeneutics, phenomenology, we also have what we call relativism. We have, I'm trying to remember one by one. We have critical paradigm. We have postmodernism. We have another one is relational philosophy. And the list is quite endless. But you need to pick one that can actually inform your study. So my job is not to go through one at a time, no, but to give you the generic explanation how you go about using philosophy. That's the important aspect that I want us to focus on, because on each of these that I've mentioned and others that you explore, I'll give you some materials so that you read through. But if I don't explain to you how you go about using them, there's going to be a problem, no matter how many you know. So the first thing when you're explaining the philosophical orientation of your study is to understand which philosophy are you going to use. You isolate the philosophy, number one. Number two, what does that philosophy mean? If you say, okay, I'm going to use critical realism, you need to tell us, what is critical realism? Oh, according to ABCD, like for example, critical realism, the father of critical realism is actually Roy Basker. Roy Basker is the father of critical realism. Okay, so critical realism according to Basker is ABCD, and after that, you need to explain how you're going to use critical realism in your study. Now, how do you explain how you're going to use a philosophy in your study? Each philosophical framework has three prongs. I would say 3 legs. The first leg is called ontology. Now you want to say, what is ontology? I'll say in brief, but you need to study from the materials. Ontology is basically the way the world is actually visualized. How is the material reality visualized within the lens of that philosophy that you have adopted. So that's what ontology is. It's actually the study of the reality, the nature of the reality, or how the world is viewed. That's what ontology is. And each one of us as human beings have our own ontological lenses, the way we see the reality out there. The second leg is epistemology. Epistemology also, don't be intimidated by this concept. It's just a Greek word which means an episteme, knowledge. So the study of knowledge. So it's basically the theory of knowledge. How is this reality, how is this ontology, how is this nature of reality then understood? So the way we understand reality is what we call ontology. So when you hear the way we understand, obviously that suggests the methods you use to understand a particular reality. So reality can be viewed, or the world view can be either is it subjective or objective reality, or is it human value free or human value ridden kind of reality. That will be able to tell you. For example, if you talk about turbidity of water, when you look at water and its turbidity, does it involve human values or human perception or human perspectives, or it just involves your quantitative objective understanding of that? You will learn that turbidity is both viewed subjectively and can also be viewed objectively. Why? Because you as a human being, you are able to see with your eyes and you are able to tell the turbidity here is very high based on what you have seen, because there is this murky color that you are seeing in the water or suspended particles. But at the same time, that is just a qualitative, subjective perspective, because others will say, I don't see it to be very turbid. Others say it's moderately turbid. But when you get a water sample and go to the lab, you would have determined the levels of turbidity. So both dimensions are required. The quantitative side, the objective side. Objectivity means your human opinion doesn't matter. What we have measured in the lab is what is going to tell us what the answer is. That's what it means. So you combine quantitatively, qualitatively, or objectively, subjectively. You combine. This is what is going to give you the correct interpretation of that reality, the ontology. The epistemology is that process you're using to understand that reality. So the way you view reality, or even in your research, you need to start asking yourself, will the nature of data that will be collected in this, or the nature of reality that is expected to emerge from this study, going to be about just objectivism or subjectivism, or it will be a combination? You need to ask that. So you have identified the philosophy, you have defined it, you have identified what its ontology is and what its epistemology is, and you explain how we are going to use those assumptions, because they are ontological assumptions and they are also epistemological assumptions outlined. Okay? So these, you don't just want to get them the way they are in books. I've told you today, don't get them just the way they are in books. Try to apply each assumption that you see to your research context. That's what is important. Not merely duplicating what's in the books. That is not acceptable. Then the last one, but to some extent in certain studies optional, the axiology, A-X-I-O-L-O-G-E, axiology. This is the issue of values. The study of values. Are there values that are human values that are expected in your study? And by the way, the choices that you are making, even by deciding which methodology to use, will require the use of values. But axiology is not always mandatory. in some instances, it can actually be put aside. But if you're doing a highly qualitative study, especially those which are cultural oriented, then you need to include axiology to see how the values, norms are actually going to influence the outcomes of your study. So don't forget, let me run you through. When you're using philosophy, first tell us the name of the philosophy you're going to use. Obviously, by naming the philosophy, you want to associate it with who originated it. What are its ontological assumptions? What are its epistemological assumptions? If there is need to mention the axiology, you may mention, but this is optional. But just to make you know that there are always these three legs that a philosophy has. And I've mentioned that when you're itemizing these ontological and epistemological assumptions, don't merely pick what is in books. When you pick a point on ontology, you state it, also explain what it means to the context of your study. That's very important. And after all this package is done, you need to justify why is, for example, hermeneutics the best approach. Why is, for example, critical realism the best approach? Why is, for example, phenomenology the best example? Why is, for example, interpretivism the best way to do your research? And then we have what we call positivism. Now, positivism, I'm just mentioning this for your information's sake. I know some people are using positivism, but positivism is an unattainable philosophical approach. Even those who want to pretend so, they have never actually attended. So positivism is a philosophical framework that is purely used. It's purely used in quantitative study, where you only study the reality objectively without your opinion, without the opinion of the participants or respondents. It's objectively only. So all biases, all human biases are removed, and you just study the reality objectively. Now, the question you would want to ask is, have you ever come across a reality that can only be understood purely objectively? You will not find that. You only presume to find it. And it's for this reason that we would love to say a reality cannot be understood perfectly, because that's what that philosophy is saying. When you remove all biases, human subjectivism, no, it's just objective. What you see is what you get. Still, it doesn't. You only try to approach perfection, but you can never be perfect. So positivism, therefore, proves to be a very over-ambitious philosophical approach to work with in a particular study. And in fact, in some universities, you use positivism, you are dead together with it. Although in our university, there are still some scholars who want to start talking about the use of positivism. But you need to learn about positivism, and you'll find quite a good text that I've put together so that it can help you. I'm trying to publish a paper on the same to kind of help you. Very soon, I think by June or so, the book should be ready. You have to buy it. You can't get it for free. So I'll explain in details these philosophies to help you understand some of these philosophies. So that's about it. Now, it may surprise you that why are we talking about philosophy in research? I think from the definition, and I think by nature of the way you know philosophy is about being inquisitive about why things are the way they are, why they exist in such a way and not the other. So that inquisitive, generic nature of philosophy just naturally commends or recommends itself into research, because research is about investigating that which is unknown and bring it to actually a clarity of understanding. So it's very important that philosophy is talking about. And when you read further, you will find that actually methodological decisions are secondary to philosophical decisions. Methodological decisions are secondary to philosophical decisions. Don't forget this. Don't. Remember. So it is actually a philosophy that will also determine the methodology that you're going to use. What next in the methodology? Research approaches. Research approaches and designs. So a research approach is a broad pathway that you're going to use to inform the other or subsequent methodological decision. And even this approach, for example, quantitative approach of doing research belongs to positivism. Belongs to positivism. Whereas qualitative way of doing things belongs to other methodologies that came after positivism. And that's why you hear about positivism versus post-positivism. So post-positivism, you will find different philosophical orientations under there that seem to actually open a way, a transgressive way of doing things, not necessarily being locked up by the strict requirements and rigidities that are found in positivism. So when you're doing a quantitative study, pure quantitative study, you are in the positivism philosophy. If you're doing qualitative study, you are in the post-positivist studies, which are interpretive in nature. And when you're doing a mixed method, because mixed method, I think from the way it reads, you're able to tell that you're tapping ideas from two paradigms, bring them together. We have what we call pragmatism as one of the philosophies. We have what we call analytic eclecticism. Analytic eclecticism. We have what we call empiric analytic. It allows, all these allow the mixing, but even critical realism can also allow the mixed methods. So you'll be able to see these things in the materials that I'll be sharing. So when you're presenting your research methodology, make sure that you have opened up with philosophical orientation. Then you go to the research approach and design. So under research approach, we have three research approaches. We have quantitative research approach, then we have the qualitative research approach, and the mixed methodology approach. Others call mixed method, but the correct is mixed methodology. So like what I explained under philosophical orientation, here my job is not to start reading line by line what these are, because the materials are already there. What has to be explained is how do you apply these in the context of your study when you're developing your research proposal. So ensure that, number one, you explain what you mean by research approach. What research approach are you going to use in your study? That is after you have explained the philosophical orientation, and you need to link the philosophical framework of your study to the research approach you're going to use. So if you have adopted positivism, we don't expect you to start talking about qualitative study or qualitative approach. Then you have committed what we call methodological adultery. So make sure that when you enter into research approach, you explain what approach are you going to use. Qualitative approach. What do you mean by qualitative approach? Who has said what about it? Then from there, explain why qualitative is the best way for your study. Then when you go under qualitative, you will find different designs under qualitative. If it is quantitative, you will also find different designs under quantitative. If it is mixed method approach, you will also find different designs under that. So it's a cascading model that we are using. And you remember what I mentioned, everything is related to everything else. So you will not do anything in isolation. Things are cascading in that order. Yeah, so when you are doing your presentation, tell us the approach you're going to use. And after telling us the approach, you need to talk about the specific design under that approach. What does that design mean? How are you going to use it in your research? And why is it the best design to use under that approach? So if you go to qualitative, there are a lot, you pick one. You need to define what that one means, how you're going to use it, and why it is the best. If you are going to quantitative, likewise. Mixed methods, likewise. That's how it's supposed to be. Now, under qualitative, what are some of the most commonly used approaches? Qualitative, by the way, is transgressive. It is open. It's always open. Even yourself, you can develop your own design and add it as long as it is scientifically peer-reviewed and validated. So we have what we call a case study. In a case study design, by the way, I want to just emphasize, we are talking about qualitative research approach. And now we need to talk about what specific research designs are found under qualitative approach. So the first one is a case study. A case study is basically a design that requires studying a smaller component. Have you seen this sheet? This sheet, we can design that this whole section here, the big section, is the bigger entity that you're studying, that you are targeting. But instead of studying all these boxes that you're seeing, you target just one. That one you go as deeper as you can go, such that if that one box is deeply studied and correctly done, what is there can actually be extrapolated to this entire area where this box has been extracted. That's what a case study is all about. So you are studying a smaller unit of a bigger picture in order to actually have very detailed insights that can actually be extrapolated to a particular, to that bigger area where the entity has been selected. So for example, if you are studying the challenges that university students actually go through when they are studying geography at a particular university, maybe you may not want to study everyone. You may want to say, okay, I'm going to target the fourth years, because fourth years have already passed through first, second, third, fourth year, and they have all the experiences, instead of interviewing the first years who don't have what happens in second year and so on. So if you go to fourth year becomes your case study under the entire geography program. So you study everyone there in detail, their social life, mental life, spiritual life, academic life, how has it been? Then from there, you're able to generalize how academic life is for all students who have done geography is, because you did it correctly. That's an example. Then we have what we call descriptive survey. And by the way, in a case study, the sample is smaller. I think you can see geography program, you just pick fourth year students. The rest, no. But once you do correct analysis of the fourth year student, what comes out can actually apply to all geography students. And the sample, therefore, is usually small, very small, because you're going into many details, such that if you get a bigger sample, you will just be in problem for yourself. Descriptive survey, you understand that actually a survey has two sides. There is a quantitative survey and a qualitative survey. Here, when you hear of descriptive survey, it's a qualitative survey. A descriptive survey is actually a snapshot overview of qualitative impressions, or a snapshot qualitative understanding of the general picture about a particular subject or a particular problem. So usually here the sample is relatively bigger, but it should not be too big such that you can't do proper analysis when the data is collected. So you may say target a sample of 125, 150 and maybe up to somewhere 200. If you start going beyond that, you are attracting the quantitative aspect. So if you're doing a descriptive survey, you're trying to get just a snapshot overview about a particular issue. Like, for example, I've been doing a quick a snapshot survey about green economy. How do people perceive green economy? Green economy, blah, 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 green economy, blah, blah, blah. So you ask few questions, maybe 5, but broaden the sample. And because of the broadness of the sample, you find that um, you still are going to have an understanding of a particular, it's a kind of a snapshot, more or less like a wave photograph captures a bigger landscape, but you are able to represent it in a very small picture to just get a snapshot impression. I think if you did your remote sensing, you are able to relate what I'm talking about. You see that aerial pictures are captured some maybe 10 or so kilometers from above the ground, and you're able to still get the general impression of what is happening. Not all the details, because to get all details, you have to be on the ground, but it gives you a snapshot overview to say, oh, land cover has been changing, and you can actually validate it by doing a more large scale assessment on the ground. So that's basically when you're doing a descriptive survey, you may want to actually look at the broad snapshot overview about something, and it's going to give you the answers. We have what we call phenomenology. I know you are surprised. Why is he talking about phenomenology when he actually also mentioned it under philosophy? So phenomenology is also used both as a philosophy and also as a design. So phenomenology is a design that focuses purely on perceptual studies. If it's the studies about perceptions of something, you will need to use phenomenology. You may work with a very small population, just like in a case study, because you'll be asking a lot of questions. You'll ask even thousands of questions about a small issue with a smaller population, and you hear the perceptions that people have about a particular issue. So if your study is highly perceptual, you may want to work with phenomenology based especially on the lived experiences of people. And related to this one is what we call ethnography, ethnicity, ethnic groups, ethnography. Ethnography is divided into two. We have the standard ethnography, where you take very long interacting with people to understand them, their ethnic beliefs, and so on and so forth. And then from there, you can write something. And then we have what we call a rapid ethnography. Rapid ethnography allows you to settle just, it could be 3 weeks up to maybe 8, 9 weeks, you're done, and you can write based on the rapid scan of the ethnic background or understanding of a particular problem. It could be on tree planting. How do different ethnic groups look at trees? Do they value them, and why do they value them? Is it because they get charcoal, or is it because they get medicine, or is it because they get building materials? And you hear all these different perspectives coming in that you want to document about. Then we have what we call grounded theory. Grounded theory is actually another design that you can work in, especially this is a theory building design. So I don't think you'd want to actually go that path, but you need to know there's what we call the grounded theory, which you can venture on, especially if you're doing a PhD. That's nice, because you have 4, 5 years, 7 years to actually explore ideas that you can ground together to eventually give birth to a theory. I remember recently there were some circulating news that there's a gentleman who took about 50 plus years, about 52 or between 50 and 55 years studying, doing a PhD. Now you can imagine, not in Africa. If you do that in Africa, then you have destroyed yourself and also your posterity. But in Europe, maybe it's acceptable. So this guy started doing a PhD around the age of somewhere 1920s. And by the time he was in his 70s, he eventually got a PhD using this approach, grounded theory, and the theory was born. But when you read through the theory, it's not worth the 55 years. What is it for? Yeah, then we have what we call um, hermeneutic survey. Hermeneutic survey. Remember, I mentioned hermeneutics in the philosophies. So, if the hermeneutics is actually the art of interpretation, you'd want to study how do people interpret some reality. For example, how are people interpreting the different effects of climate change? So, an hermeneutic survey can actually work. How are people interpreting green economy? Hermeneutic survey can actually work because people have to start decoding and dissolving different phrases and concepts that are used under green economy. So these different designs can actually be used, but you can't use all of them. You pick one. And then we have what we call action research. But action research can cut across because action research is the research that is done in order to improve practice. That's why it is called action research. So, for example, if you find that certain things are not being done well in a particular school setup, for example, geography, pupils are failing. They are always getting 5 as the best grade, 5, 6, 7, 8. Why? You can do a research design or action research where you understand, you do a baseline survey of what is really causing the failure from among teachers and also perspectives from pupils. Then from there, you actually design an intervention framework based on the findings of the study. An intervention framework, then you implement it. It's an action research. I would encourage you to do that when you're doing your PhD. I think if we are to be more impactful, let our studies, especially at the doctoral level, be inherently or generically action oriented or applied research that is going to really be uh, very useful to our national development. Now, how do you present this section? So the first thing is that tell us what approach you're going to use, what specific research design you're going to use, how are you going to use that research design, why is it the best for your study. So that calls for you to study all others in order for you to set off one. Don't be lazy, but try to search everything about all the designs that exist. After that, you pick one which speak to the context of your study. And after you've given the what, the how, and why about every choice you've made, your job is done and you're good to move on. What are some of the selected quantitative design that are generic across different disciplines? Remember, I mentioned to you that research methodology could be generic in some instance, but also area specific in certain instances. So here we will talk about the generic ones. We will not talk about designs that are used in clinical medicine or in computer science or engineering or mines. There are certain methodologies that are unique to such fields. But here is to talk about what are the generic dimensions. Yeah, so it says here that we have about 4, but it could be more, which are generic. We have what we call the analytical survey. Analytical survey is a quantitative research design that you find under quantitative research approach. Analytical survey requires you to do a very notoriously huge sample, even 10,000. You prepare research questions and you distribute them to as many people as possible, and they give you answers. And your target, you may say, I want to interview 1 million people to hear what they think about where HIV/AIDS is coming from. It's like these diseases are only known by certain people. And for us, we are on the receiving side. We just receive the illness. How it came about, who started it, nobody knows. There are a lot of rumors that maybe it started in a lab. So you'd want to hear perspective and perceptions that people have about this HIV/AIDS that has really, really affected us, especially as Africans. You may want to do a big study, analytic survey, where you need to analyze quantitatively how maybe age may influence the way you look at certain environmental objects like trees, water, soils. Will you be able to see variations in terms of the value that is attached to certain natural phenomena? It's entirely up to what you want to do. So analytic survey requires a huge sample and the use of highly robust statistical methods in order for you to come up with conclusions at the end of your study. Then we have what we call a quasi-experimental design, QUASI, quasi, half experimental design. And half experimental design is where you pick only selected variables to use in your study instead of everything. For example, if you are studying water quality, you may not study everything, all processes that are involved in water quality. Maybe you may focus on the geophysical processes that influence water quality, such as the type of sediment, the erodibility of the soils, which will eventually come with chemicals into the water and influence the chemistry, and leave out maybe human activities, the nature of landscape, or maybe the time of the year, the seasons, because all these have influence. You may not account for them. So in that, you can do a quasi-experimental design because you're not looking at all the variables that actually have an influence. Because even the water temperature, someone will say, did you test the temperature of water at different sampling points? And people say, no, I didn't do that. No, your study is incorrect. No, it can be correct as long as you have tagged it correctly with a particular design. But where you say a full experimental design, which is the third one, there's going to be problems if you say it's a full experimental design, but you have left out certain variables that actually influence water quality. So there you now need to bring in the temperatures must be tested also because they have an influence on the quality of water. The time of the year, the season, you have to do the analysis of the various weather conditions because they also have an influence. What is the issue of vegetation cover in the area? They also have influence. Where you have a high vegetative cover, the water quality is usually very good. But where the trees are cleared, there is high erodibility there. There will be a lot of turbidity in the waters. You also have to consider even the nature of sediment. There are certain types of sediment which may not pollute or change the quality of water. For example, if it is sandy sediment, that actually purifies instead of polluting. So you need to look at all these factors in order to come up with a very concise conclusion about the quality of water. So I'm just giving that as an example of how you can work with a quasi-experimental design versus a full experimental design. Then we have what we call correlational design. A correlational design is, I think, from the word where you try to establish relationships between dependent and independent variables. So you may say, is there a connection between the number of hours someone studies and the grade they are going to get? The answer lies in your choice. So you'd want to say, okay, we'd love to see what factors are influencing, or how does time influence the grade at the end of the day. So you do a correlational study. Then we have the mixed method designs. Under mixed method, you do the same. Define what it means, what specific design. So under mixed method, we have what we call concurrent design, where you collect simultaneously both quantitative and qualitative to see how they complement each other. And then we have what we call transformative, where you use the theoretical lenses to actually understand the data that has been collected and the emerging thematic meanings. Yeah, so when you're using the sequential, you don't collect quantitative and qualitative data at the same time. You instead first either start with quantitative data, then from quantitative data, you are able to develop qualitative questions to go and ask to just try to see how the quantities and the qualities are actually merging together. Or you can do it the other way around. You start with qualitative research, and then based on the qualitative findings, you develop a hypothesis which you can test using quantitative approaches. So among the three, concurrent, transformative, and sequential, you would want to pick one that you can work with if you're dealing with a mixed method approach. So a mixed method approach is quite coming strongly, and I feel like in the near future it may overtake the qualitative and the quantitative, because you agree with me that it's somehow more objective, because each approach has its own shortcomings. So thank you very much, and I would love you to finish this video quickly, and we will be looking at other components of a research methodology, and look out for the materials for your readership. Thank you.